Hey, good morning. My name is Aaron. I'm the family pastor here. I'm going to be doing the sermon today because our lead pastor had hip surgery this past week. How he's doing, and everything I've heard is he's doing well. He's recovering, and it'll take a few weeks to go through that process. So we're going to do a series on the book of Jonah called The Upside Down. Do you have that theme picture you could throw up there, Chris? The upside down, because when you look at Jonah, everything seems upside down. And we're going to be looking at the mission that God wants to do in us as we are on mission for Him. So I'm going to be covering chapter 1 today. Pastor Brad is going to be covering chapter 2 next week. Pastor Brad works down at Rose Grove and attends here, and we are thankful for him helping us out. And then Pastor Adam will do chapter 3, and I'll come back for chapter 4, and we will cover a whole book of the Bible. Something about things being upside down, right? Just causes you to want to stop and be like, what is going on here? Early in our marriage, Jill and I went to the Wisconsin Dells for vacation. Her family's from Wisconsin, so we went and visited them, went up to the Wisconsin Dells, and had a few things scheduled, and every day we kept driving by this building, and there it is. Upside down building, had this car leaned up against it, and every day we'd drive by, we're like, what do you suppose that is? We'd try to find pamphlets and stuff, and we couldn't get any information on this place, but we just kept driving by, we're like, we got to check this out. So we stopped in and bought tickets and went inside, and we saw, well, I can't tell you, because they swore us to secrecy. But there's something about an upside-down building. Have you ever felt like your life is upside down? Like when the most annoying person at work gets the promotion, and you're like, how did they land that job? Or maybe when you have a friend or a loved one who betrays you, and you're like, you're supposed to be the person rooting for me and supporting me, and instead you're turning my life upside down. Or maybe when you're trying to do everything right, and yet things just keep going wrong, and you think, what is going on here? Well, if you've ever felt that, then I think you'll like the book of Jonah. As I've been thinking of upside down things, it reminded me of a time where Jill and I met a friend from college down in Washington, D.C. He flew in for a business trip, had an evening free, so we drove down to meet him. Now, it might be hard to believe, but at this point in world history, cell phones were used for calling. And so we used to carry around this thing in our car. And it was about this big, and it was called an atlas. And we had every state in the country in that atlas. And for major cities, they even had blown up pictures of the major cities. And Washington, D.C. is a major city. So we were able to open up the atlas. He gave us the address, and we found it, and we drove there and met him at the hotel. And you might know this about Washington, D.C., but there's not a lot of places to park. So we picked him up in front of the hotel and went to find a restaurant. Now, keep in mind, this was at a point in world history where cell phones were used for calling. So we could not Google where restaurants were. So we just kept driving around because we would either find a restaurant, well, it never had parking with it. That was the big thing. So we kept driving, and we ended up on like the far side of the city. I think we were still in D.C. We found a Subway, and it had some curbside parking. We were like, let's just stop and eat. So we stopped and ate at the Subway and visited and had a good time. And then it was time to take him back to the hotel. And Jill was nice. She let him sit in the navigator chair, and he had the map. And he's directing me, and we are driving along. And I'm watching streets go by, 22nd Street, 15th Street, 11th Street, 5th Street. And all of a sudden he said, oh, you know what? I think we went too far. Let's turn around. So we turn around, no big deal. This happens when you're using a map. And then I'm watching streets go by. 5th Street, 11th Street, 15th Street. I'm like, we're not making any ground here. And then I knew we were in trouble because this is what happened. He had the map, and he went, okay. We did eventually find the place. It was quite the trip. Sometimes life feels upside down. That's what we're looking at, different aspects of this upside down in the book of Jonah. We're in Jonah chapter 1 today. If you want to look in your Bibles, there's a few Bibles in the chairs, underneath the chairs around you. We'll also have the words on the screen. Jonah chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had laid down and was fast asleep. So the captain, I got pirates on my brain. The captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." And they said to one another, "Come, let's cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us, on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, "Well, what shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous, and he said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, and then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not. For the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. You're probably familiar with this story. Jonah was a prophet, had a pretty good gig. God told him to go give this message of warning to the city of Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians had had a lot of negative conflicts with Israel throughout their history. In fact, Assyria will one day eventually destroy Israel and exile all the Israelites away. But even already, the Assyrians have been coming down and beating up Israel. This morning, I was leading one of our Sunday morning life groups, and we were going through a biblical archaeology series. And this morning, we were looking at this monument called the Kirk Monolith, where Shalmaneser talks about defeating King Ahab. He mentions King Ahab from the Bible in this monument that archaeologists have found, but he had come down and destroyed it. That's not the monument. This is another monument called the Black Obelisk, because it's a black obelisk. And in this monument, King Shalmaneser of Assyria talks about King Jehu. Pretty awesome, huh? You might not know who King Jehu is. We don't normally have Sunday school lessons on King Jehu, but he appears in 2 Kings. He's one of the kings of Israel. And get this. On this monument, the Assyrians mention King Jehu by name and picture him. Can you put that picture back up? There is a picture of this guy lying down. There he is, bending over. A character, actually two characters, because Shalmaneser is in the Bible too. Two characters from the Bible are pictured in archaeology. Does that just not blow your mind? Thank you, Randy. That blows my mind. It reminds me that all these stories are true, but I mention that because the Assyrians have already been coming. King Jehu was about 3 generations before Jonah. They've already been coming and defeating the Israelites. The Israelites did not like the Assyrians. The Assyrians were known for their cruelty and brutality. They would pile up skulls, human skulls, in front of their cities. They were nasty people, and Jonah did not want to go give this message to Nineveh, because if Jonah knew if he gave this message and they repented, that God would have mercy and grace and save them. And so Jonah starts going in the opposite direction. Throughout this story, we see several upside down things. One of the first things I notice is we have some upside down stereotypes. If I were to ask you, who is the hero in the book of Jonah, you would have a hard time telling me who the hero was. Actually, I think that the being that obeys God the best is the monster fish. Because the bad guys in Jonah become good guys. And the good guy in Jonah is always a bad guy. And everything's reversed. Take the sailors. The stereotype of sailors at this time, 2 songs make me think about how they thought of sailors. All right, the one was, yo ho, a pirate's life for me. We pillage and plunder, we rifle and loot. Stand up, me hearties, yo ho. All right, that makes me think of how people thought of sailors. The other song comes from DC Talk's album, Free at Last, which is probably the best album in all of human history. And then the second song is called That Kind of Girl. And Toby Mac is talking about wanting to find this virtuous lady. And in the first verse, he finds a lady, but she's not quite that virtuous. And he says that the other night he met a girl, and she looked to be so nice. And he asked her on a date, and she didn't think twice. A couple of days later, called her up and asked her out. She said, with you. I said, with me. And she said, without a doubt. I took her to the garden where I guess they grow the olives. She wore a tighter skirt than any I had seen in college. She said, I love to smoke and drink and curse like a sailor, right? That's what I'm getting to. The girl loved to curse like a sailor, all right? Because that was the mindset. That was the mindset of the stereotypical sailor. And yet in this story, we see that the sailors are at the end not just worshiping God, but they're making vows to God and saying, wow, I realize now that you are the true God, and I'm promising myself to you. Then you have the great monster fish. It follows God. The evil king and all the people and even the cattle, they turn and they follow God. And you even have this slimy little worm, and it's following God. And the only character in the story that is not following God is the prophet of God, who is supposed to be following God. Tim Mackey says that this is a story about a rebellious prophet who hates God for loving his enemies. Skip Heitzig says, Jonah is handing in his resignation, saying, I quit the ministry. I don't want to be a prophet. I want to be a non-profit organization. Right? And everything is upside down. We also see this upside downward spiral, because Jonah's life gets turned upside down as he starts making downward steps. God told Jonah, I want you to arise, go up to Nineveh. Even this pirate captain said, Arg, matey, arise out of your sleep and pray to ye God. All right? Everyone's telling Jonah to arise and go up. And instead, we find Jonah going down to Joppa. And then we find Jonah going down onto a ship. And then even more so, we find Jonah going down into the innermost parts of the ship where he's sleeping. And at the very end, Jonah describes his kerplunk into the ocean and in the belly of the fish as going down to the bottoms of the earth. And this prophet of God just takes step after step and keeps going on this downward spiral. In ancient days, it was thought that it took 3 days and 3 nights to descend to Sheol, the grave, the bottom of the earth where you would go when you died. And Jonah was in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And when he reaches literally the lowest point in his spiritual life and his physical life, he finally says, fine, God, I'll do it your way, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And that's what we see. And he encounters some problems along the way. One of the things that happens is when he goes to get on the ship, the Bible specifically says he paid his own fare. Take Paul, for example. At the end of Romans, Paul is on a mission for God, and he says, I'm going to go to the emperor of Rome to share the gospel with him, but first God's having me go to Jerusalem. So he goes to Jerusalem. Paul gets captured and arrested for being a Christian, and they ship him to Rome for free, right? Because he was following God's mission. But Jonah is running in the other direction, and it says he paid his own fare. Because there's a price that we pay when we run in the other direction from God. Not just he paid the fare, but the sailors paid the fare too, because our choices affect the people around us. And they were tossing their cargo over the sea. And then you have the storm. And Jonah says that God hurled this tempest at this ship. And it's true, sometimes God sends storms to us to get us back on track. Now, I want to pause here because not all storms come from God. We have a tendency to think that every storm comes from God. But if we look at the whole word of the Bible, we see that some storms are supernatural, caused by God. Some storms are supernatural, and they're caused by Satan, like in the book of Job. We see that some storms aren't supernatural at all. They're just natural storms. But we might have put ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. When Paul was on his trip to Rome, they had another leg of the journey to do. And Paul said, hey, we're going into stormy season. Don't go on this trip because chances are we're going to have a storm. But those sailors said, we know what we're doing. We'll be fine. And they made a choice, and they put themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. And just a natural storm came up. Some storms are natural, and they're not a result of anybody's choices, except that we live in a cursed world because all of us have sinned and broken this world. Some storms result from our own choices like Jonah. Some storms result from the choices around us, like the sailors' experience when the storm came because of what Jonah did. And again, some storms are just because this world is broken and messed up. It's hard to sometimes distinguish what type of storm you're going through. But it's good to realize that there are different causes so that you're not attributing God to a storm that maybe we put ourselves in. In this case, we know for sure God caused this storm. In the book of Jonah, every divine act is always to get people back on track. Everything God did was to get people back on track. I thought to myself as I was studying Jonah this time, why did God wait until the sea? I mean, Balaam was just walking on his donkey, and God stopped him there and made sure he was on the right track. Why did God wait until he got to the sea? And I don't know for sure, but I can't help but see that because God did this order of events, where Jonah got on the ship, and then the storm happened, that a pirate crew and their captain, they weren't pirates, this crew and their captain all got saved and started following God because of it. And I thought, even in the storm that was to get Jonah back on track, God is setting it up perfectly to get this crew on track. And that, I was like, wow. You go from the fish to the worm. Everything that happened in Jonah's life was God not trying to squash Jonah, but God trying to get Jonah to turn in the right direction, in both physically and in his heart. Even this message of destruction to Nineveh, there were times in the prophets where God would give these messages to foreign nations, and the prophets didn't have to go to the foreign nation. They just stood up in Israel and said, hey guys, guess what? Babylon's going to get beat up. God's justice is going to happen. And that was the prophecy. But here in Jonah, God said, Jonah, I want you to go take this message to them. The purpose was not to gloat or boast over them or doom them to destruction. The purpose that we can see from our outside view is that even this message of doom and gloom was meant to change the hearts of the Ninevites back to God and get them back on track. Once I had a gentleman come and talk to me, and he said, hey, I'm going to happen in your life. He has been using to steer you in the right direction to get your life back on track. There was the storm on the outside, but that was not as powerful as the storm on Jonah's inside. Throughout this book, Jonah is bitter, miserable, depressed, angry, and several times he's like, I just want my life to be over. When we encounter those storms on our inside, sometimes they're because of our choices. Sometimes those storms are because of the choices of people around us. It's often hard to distinguish between the two, but I want to encourage you, because I've been praying for an atmosphere of openness here at LifePoint, where people can feel open, all of us can feel open to be able to share honestly how we're doing. And I want to encourage you, because there's storms that go on in our lives, and Satan loves to keep us down in the bottom of the ship when that's happening. But God has set this world in a way where if we can talk with each other and share what's going on, we can offer, we can be Jesus on. We have these connection cards in the seats around you. There's even a box that says confidential, and you can always feel free to write on that and drop them in the boxes at the back, because we want to be here to do life together. Jonah had a storm going on, and sometimes we feel upside down. The good news is that if you're feeling upside down, about a year ago, I was driving on Interstate 81, and I discovered the answer. Here it is. No lie. This car passed me. Passed me. I didn't pass it. It passed me, because I drive slow. On 81, And I Googled it, and there's pictures. And I was like, hey, that's great. It's your life upside down. Jesus can fix it. That's what I'm trying to talk about today. And that's the third upside down that I see. We saw upside down stereotypes. We saw an upside downward spiral. But we also see in Jonah an upside down change. That when God saves us and we start going in the right direction, that beforehand our life is going one way, and now our life is going the other way. Beforehand our life is going down, but now we're rising and going up where we're supposed to go. And here at LifePoint, we often have these eyes on our shirts and around. And the first time I met Pastor Randy, he was showing me around the church, and I said, why is the eye upside down? And he said, it's because when Jesus comes into our life, he changes us and turns our life upside down. And I really like that. And we have these symbols of our spiritual journey, how we start off one way, and when we trust in Jesus, that he died on the cross for our sins, that he was buried, that he came back to life, that he can save us and forgive us, when we trust that, he brings life into us, a new type of eternal life. And that's the change in the color from the white to the blue. And then Jesus wants to continue on from there. And he wants to take our life and he wants to turn it upside down and teach us a new way of living, and then help use us to disciple others to teach them that way of living. And coincidentally, the kids in Kidsburg today in elementary are learning about Jesus' teaching, and that Jesus teaches us this upside down way of living. Because Jesus, when he taught, he said, if you are poor in spirit and hungry for righteousness, you are actually blessed. And people were like, what? That doesn't sound right. And he said, yeah, for real. This tax collector, his prayer is better than this religious leader's prayer. Really? Jesus said, if you do something good, I want you to do it so that nobody else sees it. Not even your left hand knows what your right hand is doing. Only God sees it. Jesus said, you are blessed if you are persecuted and beat up. What? That doesn't sound right. He said, if someone hits you on this cheek, I want you to turn your face so they can hit you on this one. In all the times that I've seen anti-bullying seminars, I have never heard this advice given. Because it doesn't go with our thinking. It's different. It's upside down. Jesus said, I want you to love your enemies. If someone hurts you, I want you to forgive them. And if they hurt you again, forgive them again. And if they keep hurting you and doing the same thing over and over, I want you to keep forgiving them. Jesus, come on now. That's not right. Surely you would want me to protect myself and not be hurt anymore. Jesus said, guess what? In this room, the greatest person in this room is the person serving others. It's a lot of things that don't make sense. In fact, when we hear them, we might say, oh, this is good teaching by Jesus, but this doesn't apply to my situation. In an ideal world, this would work, but this isn't an ideal world. All right, this is an exception. Like, yeah, that's good most of the time, but this is what I'm going through is an exception. You have to understand my circumstances, and what he's saying there doesn't apply to me. That's the type of thinking. Because what Jesus wants us to do is countercultural and is upside down. But this is what I have come to learn. Because we think that Jesus' way is abnormal, is different. What I have come to learn is that when God created the world and we broke it, that at that time the world was cursed. So at that time, all of us are living this way. It's just when all of us live this way, this seems normal. And what Jesus wants to do is he wants to change our lives and turn it upside down, but actually right side up, because it's actually going with the way he created this world. When Jesus created this world, everything he did was in the nature of him. So even at Christmas time, we think of Jesus coming and being born in a stable, and we make a big deal of this, right? The King of all kings being born in a stable. Oh, this is slanderous. This is terrible. They didn't even have room for him in the inn. How could this be? And what I'm thinking is, what if that's not slanderous? What if God specifically chose that because that's the most normal thing in his nature and in this created world? If the greatest person in the room is the least and the person who is serving, and if our God is the God who sacrifices himself because that's in his nature, and the world is created in his nature, and so he created us in his image, and so the most normal thing for me to do is to serve others and sacrifice myself, then all of a sudden it makes sense that when I go out of my way to help somebody that I could ignore or step on, that all of a sudden I feel good. And when I go be part of a mission trip where we help build homes and ramps and stuff for a week, that at the end of the week I'm like, I feel good. Because for once in my life, I'm actually acting the true normal. Does that make sense? We're upside down. Jesus wants to change us upside down so that we're actually right side up. Will you join us on this journey over the next couple weeks as we look at the book of Jonah? And the mission that God wants to do in Jonah's life, wow, God is sending Jonah on a mission to impact others. We talked about stereotypes and characters: Jonah, the sailors, the monster fish, the Ninevites, the worm. We haven't talked about the most important character in the story, besides God, obviously. The most important character in the story is the person reading the story. Because you'll notice that it's written in a way and ends with a question, because the whole book is not written about Jonah. It's written about you and about me. And what is God going to do in our lives while we are on mission for him? I want to encourage you to change the stereotype this week. Worship band, if you guys want to come on up. You see, back in June, I took Levi to a new PT doctor up at Hershey. And I kind of have a perception, stereotype of doctors, especially big-time doctors at like Hershey and children's hospitals and things like that. And I have this perception that doctors, their time is valuable. And it's probably going to. And I had this perception that, at a hospital, I don't accept anything for free because I found out I just end up paying for it afterwards. All right, these are my stereotypes that I'm working with in my head. So we had this new appointment with this PT doctor at Hershey. And we came out, it was a little after 5, and I go to start my car. And it doesn't even click. Like, there is nothing there. And my battery is totally died. And I am in Hershey, an hour and so away from home. Jill's in a meeting with some of you guys for summer adventure. Some of you guys will remember this. And I don't have food. I don't have water. It's going to be a mile walk to get to a restaurant or an auto zone. and I'm with a son who doesn't really enjoy walking, and it's hot outside, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and some of these auto stores are closing soon, and I don't even have tools to change the connections around. And at that time, our PT doctor is walking out of the building. We were her last patients for that day. And she stopped and said, "Hey, let me call my husband. He's done some mechanic work." She called her husband. He drove 10 minutes to come in and brought tools with him. He tried to start us, but the battery was totally dead. So he drove me in his car to AutoZone to get a new battery, while the doctor and the office administrator stayed after their shift was over, after the office had closed down, and they watched Levi and gave him snacks and kept him entertained. And we went and got him, and the office administrator did all that. And when I typed that story on Facebook, people made comments like, this restores my faith in humanity. Because we have these stereotypes, don't we? Of sailors, of even prophets. And if you look at stereotypes of Christians in the media and movies and TV shows, we do not look that good. And we have stereotypes of just humans in general. But all of a sudden, you see a person whose life is different, and they come along, and they act in the nature of God, and you're like, this is the way it's supposed to be. When people see you this week, will you change their stereotype? Will you live the way Jesus wants us to live, so that they can see him in you? I'm going to ask you to stand. This song starts off talking about Jesus' sacrifice. It's his nature. It's who he is. It's how he created this world and how he created us. Will we run with him, or will we try to run in the opposite direction? Change the stereotype.
Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled.